The first thing I saw wasn't a badge or a clipboard. It was a rifle barrel, steady pointed right at my chest, through a half-open front door. 5 guys in tactical vests were spread across my porch like they owned the place, and behind them, smiling like she'd ordered takeout, stood the president of the Homeowners Association. "We need the code to your gun safe," one of them said, like that was a normal sentence people say on a Tuesday. I didn't move fast, didn't yell, didn't do anything heroic. I just froze for half a second because my brain couldn't accept what my eyes were seeing. Then my training kicked in, not the tough guy kind, the don't escalate control the moment kind. I raised my hands, kept my voice flat, and asked the only question that mattered. "Who the hell are you?" The guy nearest the door tilted his head like I was being difficult on purpose. "Sentinel Compliance," he said, tapping the patch on his vest like a patch was a search warrant. "We're here for a community safety check." And there she was, Diane Hart, HOA president, perfectly pressed, blazer, perfect blonde hair, holding a tablet like it was a weapon too. She leaned in just enough for me to hear her over the radio chatter. "Jake, don't make this hard," she said, soft and friendly, the same tone people use when they're trying to get you to sign something you shouldn't. I stared at her and actually laughed once, sharp and humorless, because it was either that or, I don't know, faint. "You brought armed guys to my porch to ask for my safe code," I said. "Do you hear yourself?" Diane didn't flinch. "It's a compliance inspection," she replied. "You were flagged. If you cooperate, this ends fast." Flagged. Like I was luggage. I live in Willow Creek Estates, one of those neighborhoods that advertises peaceful community living and then spends all its energy measuring grass height with a ruler. When I moved in, I wanted quiet, not perfect, not curated, just quiet. My house, my mortgage, my business, my life. The end. I should have known I was buying into a little kingdom the minute I saw the HOA office was nicer than the local library. The sentinel guy at my door took a half step forward, and I watched his fingers tighten on his weapon. My stomach went cold, but my voice stayed steady. "You don't get the code," I said. "You don't get inside. You don't get to stand on my property armed and call it safety. Leave." Diane's smile widened, like she'd been waiting for that exact line. "Non-compliance will be documented," she said, raising her tablet so the camera could see my face. "This is about protecting families, Jake." "Then stop pointing guns at one," I snapped. "They didn't kick my door in. They didn't arrest me. They did something worse. They backed off slowly like I was the problem, then climbed into their SUVs and rolled away like it was routine." I stood there with my heart pounding, my hands still half up, feeling ridiculous in my own doorway. And that's when my phone buzzed. An email. Subject line, "Urgent Safety Violation Notice." No law cited, no statute. Just a neat little paragraph telling me the Homeowners Association had identified a high-risk condition and I had 72 hours to comply with security verification, or I'd face fines, legal action, and possible insurance repercussions. Insurance repercussions. That was the hook they loved. By the end of the day, another email came, then another. Different sender names, same wording, like copy and paste was their religion. There was always a deadline, always a warning, always that tone, the one that tries to sound official so you don't notice it's nonsense. That night around 10, I saw a black SUV idling across the street with the lights off. No one got out. It just sat there, engine humming, a faint glow from a dashboard screen. I told myself it was coincidence. At midnight, it was still there. The next morning, I walked my trash to the curb and caught my neighbor, Mrs. Palmer, peeking through her blinds like she was watching a nature documentary. When our eyes met, she didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just pulled the blinds shut like I was contagious. That's when I realized Diane had already been talking. By day 2, the story had shifted. It wasn't Jake won't cooperate. It was Jake has something to hide. The kind of rumor that doesn't need facts, just fear. Diane called a special community meeting for noon on a Wednesday because nothing says transparency like scheduling something when normal people are at work. I showed up anyway because I wasn't going to let her narrate my life without me in the room. The clubhouse smelled like cheap coffee and air freshener trying to cover old carpet. Diane sat at the front with her little gavel, 2 board members beside her, and a stack of papers already arranged like evidence. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if I felt threatened by 5 armed strangers on my porch. She just launched in, smiling at the crowd like she was hosting a game show. Homeowners Association leadership has a duty to protect the community, she announced. We've received reports of unsecured firearms. I felt heat rise in my neck. Reports from who, I said, loud enough to cut through the murmurs. Diane didn't look at me. She looked at the room. We won't be discussing sources, she said. But due to the severity, we've authorized Sentinel Compliance to perform verifications. Authorized, like they were a city council. I leaned forward. You don't get to authorize armed men to demand entry into my home, I said. You don't have that power. Diane finally met my eyes. You signed the covenants, she replied, sweet as poison. You agreed to community standards. Community standards. Somehow that phrase now included my front porch turning into a SWAT audition. 2 board members nodded along like bobbleheads. Diane held up a paper and tapped it with a manicured nail. This is a temporary safety directive, she said. If Mr. Miller refuses compliance, fines will begin immediately. I looked around the room and saw what she wanted me to see, people shifting in their seats, avoiding my gaze, pretending they weren't choosing sides. Not because they believed her, but because they didn't want to be next. And for the first time since I moved in, I felt something close to exhaustion, the kind that sinks into your bones. Not fear of them, but the weight of realizing I might be fighting an entire neighborhood's apathy. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, reading the covenants I'd signed like they were a foreign language. I wasn't spiraling or anything dramatic. I wasn't staring into the void. I was doing the normal, boring thing people do when they start wondering if they missed a line in the fine print. And in the quiet, I actually asked myself out loud, did I screw up by moving here? Not because I thought Diane was right, because I knew how this works. If they bury you in paperwork and threats long enough, you start spending your energy proving you exist. Then another email hit my inbox, this one from a community insurance liaison I'd never heard of, offering a paid verification program to keep my coverage unaffected. Monthly fee. Mandatory check-ins. Secure access confirmation. I stared at it and something snapped into place. Because it wasn't just intimidation, it was a product. So I stopped arguing with Diane and started following the money. I searched the company name at the bottom of the email, then I searched Sentinel Compliance, then the liaison business, different logos, different websites, same mailing address, same registered agent, and the registered agent's name was on the HOA board's vendor disclosure form right next to a line that said consulting services. My stomach dropped, not from fear this time, but from disgust. This wasn't about safety. This was a racket. The next day I called my actual insurance company, not the mystery liaison in my inbox. I asked one simple question. If I refuse to give an HOA contractor access to my private safe, does that affect my policy? The woman on the phone paused, then said, "No, sir. That's not a requirement at all." I asked her to email that to me. Then I called the county office and asked about HOA authority over private property inspections involving weapons. The clerk sounded tired, like she'd answered too many weird questions lately, and said they have no legal authority to do that. I asked him to point me to the statute. Then I called an attorney, Reed recommended by a buddy who didn't like bullies. Reed didn't gasp. He didn't dramatize it. He just said calm and clear, "Don't talk to them anymore. Document everything. We're going to make them regret putting this in writing." That night, a new message came in, anonymous. No name, no subject line. Just an attachment and 6 words in the body. "She's doing this to everyone." Inside was a meeting transcript and a spreadsheet. Houses labeled like targets compliant pending resistant. Notes in the margins about leverage pressure insurance angle. My address highlighted in red. I didn't feel heroic reading it. I felt sick. Because if Diane could do this to me, she could do it to any quiet family 2 streets over who didn't know how to push back. And that was the moment I stopped thinking of it as my problem and started seeing it as a line she wasn't allowed to cross. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Friday night primetime, full house, phones out. Diane ready to put on her show. She walked in, smiling confident like she already had the ending written. I sat near the front, silent, my folder on my lap. Reed wasn't beside me. He didn't need to be. Diane opened with the same speech, family safety community. Then she pointed at me like she was calling a defendant to the stand. "Mr. Miller has refused verification," she announced. "We will proceed with enforcement." I stood up slowly and said, "Before you do that, I have a question. Diane smiled wider like she was about to swat a fly. "Go ahead," she said. I held up the printed email from my insurance company. "Why are you telling people insurance will be affected?" I asked, when my insurer says it won't. A ripple moved through the room, not outrage, just curiosity, the kind that scares people like Diane. Her smile tightened. "Different policies have different standards," she said quickly. I nodded once. "Okay," I said. "Second question, why do your vendors share an address with the insurance liaison sending paid compliance offers?" Diane's eyes flicked just for a second to the board member on her left. That's when the doors at the back of the clubhouse opened. Not dramatically, not slammed, just opened. Two sheriff's deputies walked in with a county investigator and a man in a plain jacket holding a folder thick enough to ruin someone's weekend. The room went silent in the way it does when people realize something real just entered their fake little world. The investigator stepped forward, looked at Diane and said, "Ma'am, we need to ask you about your relationship with Sentinel Compliance and the solicitation of funds under false pretenses." Diane blinked like she didn't understand the language. I didn't move. I just watched. One of the deputies asked, "Are you Diane Hart?" She stood up, gavel still in her hand, and tried to pull herself taller. "This is a private meeting," she snapped. "You can't." The deputy didn't raise his voice. "Ma'am," he said again, steady, "are you Diane Hart?" Her mouth opened, then closed. The confidence drained fast, replaced by that frantic calculation people do when their script breaks. The investigator flipped open his folder and said, "We have contracts, payment records, and communications. We also have a complaint regarding armed intimidation at a private residence." Diane's face went pale. That was a safety she started. The investigator cut her off, calm as a metronome. "Did you authorize personnel to demand access to a private gun safe and request a code?" Diane looked around the room like someone might rescue her with a distraction. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because in that moment everyone finally understood what I'd been dealing with, and what it meant that she'd been doing it behind closed doors. The deputy stepped closer. "Ma'am," he said, "turn around." Diane's gavel slipped out of her hand and hit the floor with a dull, stupid sound, the most fitting noise in the world. She whispered something I couldn't hear, maybe a threat, maybe a plea, and then the cuffs clicked shut. Phones came up higher. Someone gasped. Someone else said, "Oh my God," like they couldn't believe consequences existed. Diane was guided toward the exit, stiff and shaking eyes wide, still trying to look like she was in charge, even as she lost it in real time. The board members sat frozen, staring straight ahead, as if stillness could erase their names from the paperwork. I didn't smile. I didn't clap. I didn't say a word. I just sat back down and watched her walk out of that room, not as the HOA president, not as the neighborhood bully, but as a person finally meeting the boundary she thought didn't apply to her. And that's the lesson. When someone uses community as a weapon, the only way to stop them is to put the truth in writing and make it public.